just I'm going to bring an issue, a slight issue on the minutes of the council. That's why I've put my hand up.
Okay, I'll come back to you then when we reach that item on the agenda. Councillors, members of the public, if you're out there and listening on this, it is with deep regret that Council notes the death of Councillor Tony Greaves. And therefore I'm going to, in this very special circumstance, since it was so recent, introduce an emergency motion to Council at this point in time. Councillor Greaves' contribution to his adopted township of Colne and the borough of Pendle is beyond equal, and his commitment to improving the lives of local people unsurpassed. As a borough and former Lancashire County Councillor, he served the local population for over half a century, and with his own inimicable style, he championed the region and its development with a dedicated, persistent, and dogged determination, which has left an outstanding legacy. In his other capacity as a life peer and member of the House of Lords, Baron Greaves of Pendle worked tirelessly to bring the concerns of the local people to the attention of Her Majesty's government to great effect. And therefore I wish to introduce this motion. This Council therefore wishes to record their appreciation for all the hard work, experience, expertise and creativity that Councillor Greaves brought to this Council chamber. Secondly, to publicly express their gratitude to Councillor Greaves by communicating this sentiment to his family, and to thank Heather and his daughters Vicky and Helen for sharing their lives with this Council. And finally, the Council also requests that some other more permanent and public recognition of his service be investigated and commissioned, which reflects the true magnitude of his contribution to our community. That is a motion that I'd like to set before you. It doesn't need a seconder since I've introduced it from the chair, but I will, at this point, open the discussion to members of Council if they wish to add or detract from what I just said. And I think in order to lead this discussion off amongst councillors, you'll excuse me, Leader, I will first of all turn to Deputy Leader of the Council here, Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For over 50 years, Tony Greaves has applied his liberal values in his work for the people of Colne and for the people of Pendle. In Colne, everyone knows someone who Tony has helped. His contribution to Pendle, its people and its politics is incalculable. Tony has made a difference for individuals and he's made a difference for communities. Without any airs or graces, he's been indefatigable in fighting for the person in the street. He was never afraid to speak truth to power. Passionate and principled, Tony has been uncompromising in his work for residents. In the council chamber and beyond, he's generally sought consensus rather than conflict. As you said, Mr. Mayor, his dogged determination has certainly got results, but it's exasperated many, including me. But Tony would never leave a stone unturned in order to get an acceptable outcome. Tony has left his mark on Colne, the community he loved, there's myriads of projects which are a result of his handiwork. And I'll just mention one as an example, Shackleton Hall, which lay derelict for decades. Tony worked assiduously to eventually get Shackleton Hall brought back into use and good repair. And I think that's an example of the way in which he worked over decades to put things right. Perhaps Tony's greatest legacy is his influence on Pendle Council itself, its culture, its traditions, its localism, openness, and the can-do approach, and its cross-party, cooperative approach. Though one of a kind, Tony has always been part of a team, and some of his teammates are here in this meeting now, picking up the torch of liberalism that Tony has carried for so long and so ably. My thoughts and the thoughts of our group are with Heather and Vicky and Helen and the wider family as we pay tribute to Tony's work for each and every one of us here in Pendle. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Greaves. Following that interruption, I would like everyone to spend a few minutes on reflection and gathering their thoughts and getting their emotions under control, and ask for councillors to observe a 2-minute silence in respect of Councillor Greaves. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Iqbal, would you like to add any words to what has already been said?
I would, Mr. Mayor, and first of all, I echo the comments of yourself and Councillor David Whip, but I was talking to Tony on Monday evening to discuss this actual meeting, and the next morning when I got a phone call from David to share this extremely sad news, it really hit me, because on Monday Tony had agreed with me that he would ring me on Tuesday to discuss one of the motions, and I said, yeah, that's fine, Tony, no problem, but I didn't want to be at this meeting talking about one of our adopted sons of Lancashire, no longer with us, Mr. Mayor. And you know, I've known Tony in terms of my political career since I joined the council in 1998, but I think I really got to know Tony in 2015 when Tony was appointed by the council as my deputy leader. And you know, David has alluded to Tony's experience. Tony, when I appointed him as my deputy, one things that he said to me at the time, Mr. Mayor, and I'll remember that for the rest of my life. He said, "Look, forget the politics. Forget that you're Labour and I'm a Liberal and somebody else is a Conservative. If you ever need to pick on my brains, just pick the phone up, Iqbal, and I'm happy to help." And there have been occasions over the last 5 or 6 years, Mr. Mayor, where, you know, when I've had to talk at other venues and represent the borough, I've known that I can pick the phone up to Tony and say, Tony, I need to dip into your vast amount of knowledge and just need some help in terms of how to deal with this. And Tony has offered genuine, sincere advice to me, and that's something that's rare in certainly politicians in this day and age, Mr. Mayor. Tony, you know, was a formidable individual, and if he needed to hammer home his message, he would argue all day and night. As some of us have sat through meetings where, as soon as Tony wanted to speak, some of us would say, "Oh God, here we go on a lecture of history going back," and Tony would say, "Well, in 1970 this, or 1960 this is how things used to happen," and I'd sit there and think, Tony, I wasn't even born then. But Mr. Mayor, the news that people received earlier this week, and I think a testament of Tony's legacy is that you talk to some of his actual political opponents outside of this chamber, and they actually respect him for the man that he was. He was a genuine, sincere man who really wanted to help the people of Pendle. And, you know, if I was in his position when Tony was elevated to the House of Lords, many a councillors would have thought, you know what, stuff this, I'll go and enjoy the life in the House of Lords, won't get involved in the nitty-gritty of helping people. But he wasn't that type of character. And on behalf of the council and certainly my group and me as an individual, Mr. Mayor, I could say that I've lost a friend in the chamber and outside the chamber. And Tony certainly will not be forgotten by many of us who were blessed to have known him over a number of years. And my thoughts go out to Heather and the rest of the family. But I concur with your comments at the end of your speech, Mr. Mayor, where you said that the borough should honour Tony in a lasting legacy, because I want my children and their children to, at some point in the future, and say, you know, that man played a part in my future, even though many of them may not remember him at the time. But, Mr. Mayor, not something that I wanted to speak about tonight, but sadly, we've lost one of our own, and respect to Tony.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Ahmed? Nadeem? Hello? Councillor Ahmed?
Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now, Councillor.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Totally agree with everything that's been said by yourself, Councillor Whip and Councillor Iqbal. Tony's been involved in politics for over 50 years and in fact has dedicated most of his life in helping other people and the community, and has always tried to do the best for Colne, for Pendle, and has always been someone who's represented us not just at Pendle but on a national level in the House of Lords, and always has tried to get the best deal for Pendle at every opportunity. And that will be a huge loss for Pendle. and the impact which Tony had for us here in Pendle cannot be underestimated. It's vast, and it's very difficult to replace this sort of loss that we've all suffered this week. In terms of the knowledge and experience which Tony possessed, unbelievable. We all agreed the amount of detail Tony went into, the understanding he showed, and how he read all the documents page by page. Not only read the documents, but understood them, and more importantly, understood the implications of what was being reported, and had a real grasp and understanding of the implications of the reports. And I think, including myself, not many of us have that sort of great detail and understanding. And I remember Tony in 2004 when I first became elected as a councillor, and the role Tony played in the regeneration in Whitefield. Tony played a massive role, and I genuinely say this, that I don't believe that regeneration and the success of it, the multi-million-pound investment in Whitefield, could have been delivered as successfully as it was without Tony's involvement through the Whitefield Regeneration Partnership, which he was a main person and kind of steered the group, even though he wasn't chairing the meeting, but he was the focus and the steering and the wheel behind it, and he was instrumental in that. And I think the people of Whitefield will always be grateful for Tony's help, even though he never represented Whitefield, but he wanted to help, like Councillor Whip said and Councillor Iqbal said, and yourself, that he genuinely wanted to help other people, which he did. And I think our meetings will never be the same. I think his character, his charisma, the way he spoke in great detail made us laugh, sometimes made us angry. He did, but that was Tony, because he spoke from the heart, and that's who he was. And I genuinely was shocked when I heard the news, and it's a very sad day for all of us. And on behalf of the Conservative group, my thoughts and prayers go to Heather and the rest of the family. And he's someone who will always be remembered and missed. And I totally agree with the sentiment that there should be some long-lasting legacy so we can always remember Tony. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the words that have just been spoken by the various people that have been spoken will be a great comfort to the family. I know that Vicky is listening, and I'm sure the others are. I can't really say much more, but I've had comments this week that each comment from different people have really summed him up. You know, one of the councillors described him as a political giant and a genius, which he was. And yeah, I was talking to somebody this morning, and you know, he more or less said the same. Somebody on this council now, you know, and I think, and I know that if you spoke to Tony or you listened to him, you learnt something. Every single time you learnt something. And I'm certainly grateful for that. He gave me some great advice. I've known him nearly 40 years. And, you know, when my husband died, Tony said to me, in Tony's way, carry on, because you'll need it. And I knew exactly what he meant. And so I did carry on, rather than give up the council. And here I am now, and I know that I needed it. So that was his advice to me. But he was always concerned, you know, how you were feeling, how you were doing. He would often ring me but there was nothing ever sloppy about it. It was, "Are you all right?" You know, and we'll carry on. Oh goodness, a huge loss, and I think we're just beginning to realise just what Tony did, what he stood for, how much he cared. Nothing he ever did was for him, it was for all of us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got to say, when I learned the news, I was genuinely upset, because for a man who has dedicated over 50 years service to an area, to just suddenly die unexpectedly is shocking. And I was genuinely gutted as well, because I liked listening to what he had to say when it comes to the history of how decisions are made. And I think that sort of thing will be missed at council meetings, particularly at Colne Area Committee, where everybody seemed to get on really well. And one thing that I will always remember, I was once chairing a Colne Area Committee meeting, and it was getting a bit hairy, and I had to take control of the meeting, and I overheard Councillor Greaves say to Councillor Lord, "Isn't Councillor Nixon a good chairman?" And I thought, coming from somebody 45 years my senior, someone like Councillor Greaves, Lord Greaves, to say something like that under his breath, it meant a lot to me, did that, to be honest, Mr. Mayor. So I will miss his knowledge and experience on the council. Fair enough, we were on opposite sides and we didn't always get on, and there was always bust-ups, but that's part of the course in politics, really. So I just wanted to put my I wanted to record my thoughts and condolences, Mr. Mayor. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor Tennant.
I've known Tony on and off over about 8-9 years. We'd had some ding-dongs, mainly during election times, but he never held a grudge, and he'd be all smiles next time he saw you. And I would say just under 2 years ago, we went on the climate change emergency working group together, and I can honestly say it was a pleasure and a privilege to work with him. He really cared about Pendle. He really cared about the countryside around Pendle. He really cared about the wildlife, and he brought an awful lot of knowledge to it. So I like Councillor Nixon, I was very upset when I heard the news. But I would like to extend my condolences to his family, and I'm sure that will also come from everybody who worked on the climate change working group as well, and he will be missed.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I've only known Tony for 5 years, but I've had the privilege of working within local government since 1968, and I've met a lot of people in that time who I've had immense respect for, and Tony rates high of them all. Many nights when Tony and I would sit in policy and resources, we would share opinions, we would discuss items together as we sat on the table, and I was awed. I was in awe of his experience, his knowledge, his intelligence, his ability to talk with all and to express with all his opinion. We may not always have agreed, but I certainly had the respect. And, Mr. Mayor, the respect that I feel that must be paid to Tony is that I was rung at home on Tuesday morning with the sorry news from one of his constituents to inform me. And since that time, I have had constituents from Colne and from Barrowford who have all shown their respect for Tony and their concern of the loss of Tony. God bless you, Tony. Rest in peace, and thank you for all that you've done. God bless you, Tony.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Victoria Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've only known Tony for the last 3 years since I was elected in 2018. And there is no getting away from the fact that it did take Tony 5 minutes to make a point that he could have made in 2. But each time he spoke, he did bring a wealth of knowledge and experiences that are unrivaled in this chamber. This helped him make his point and no doubt got many people to see things from an alternative perspective. Yes, he was outspoken and he said things that on occasion upset others. But if we are to learn anything from Tony, it is that you should have the courage to say things that are not popular. And if you believe in what you are saying, don't take it back or apologise for having a different point of view. As someone who believes strongly in freedom of speech, I believe that people like Tony are needed now more than ever. Tony may have been of a different political party to me, but my first year as a councillor, it was Tony that helped me. We bonded over a planning application we were both opposed to, and he kind of took me under his wing. We would chat before the Colne Area Committee meetings. I was struggling to settle into life as a councillor and wasn't too clear on what was expected of me. So Tony helped me a lot in my first year. I had occasionally messaged him online about things and always found him willing to help, and he always replied. He never ignored me. In our last area committee in March, after the public had been excluded, Tony raised the issue that I'd been raising at meetings for over 12 months. Looking back at the last few weeks, I'm glad that he did raise this issue, as it gave me a chance to say thank you to him. My last words to Tony were to thank him, so I repeat those words again now. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Victoria. Councillor Zafar Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I generally tend to have quite a lot to say when I feel extremely passionate about our role as representatives. And tonight is evidence that sometimes words are simply not enough to describe somebody who, in my view, is probably the most symbolic political representative in Pendle. And that comes from myself, who has only been involved with Pendle Borough Council for a limited number of years, and granted even in local government through town council. I met Tony for the first time in person at the launch of the Unity Wellbeing Centre in Nelson, and his insight, his passion, his genuineness, and his passion to give time to a cause is, in my view, I've never experienced from any local individual who was involved in local politics. And we have some unbelievable personalities who've given endless amount of time to local government, be it through being elected representatives, officers of the council, of local parish and town councils too. And in my view, I don't think Tony has a comparator. And I say that from a very inexperienced, being an inexperienced councillor, And I'm sure and I'm confident that colleagues will second me on that view. In terms of Tony's legacy, lots to take away from that. And obviously, when the dust settles, life, of course, will go on, but life will never, of course, be the same for colleagues, regardless of political persuasion. So rest in peace, Tony, and thank you very much for your contributions to Pendlebury Council and for everything that you've done in your time as an elected representative and, of course, as a member of the House of Lords as well.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Zafar. Last but not least, the people that have got their hand up to speak on this, I think, is Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I just add to this that most of the words that have been spoken about Tony are 100% true. And also, Tony, as far as I'm concerned, was a rock of Pendle. He was stamped all the way through him. And he's left us with a legacy of all the knowledge that he had, he's taken it with him. That is a very cunning plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. I should add, I think perhaps at this point, that I did email Heather just after I got the news, expressing my personal feelings and condolences to the family, and there will be an official mayoral or mayor's office card and tribute following tomorrow, I believe. It's on the mayor's desk waiting for me to sign tonight after tonight's meeting. So there will be an official council recognition, which leaves me to put before you the motion that I have set out. I have not heard a word of dissent, so can I take it as a unanimous acceptance of the motion?
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, councillors. I will now therefore move back to the formal agenda and remind councillors of the requirement to declare any pecuniary financial interest that they may have in any item on the agenda tonight, and oblige them to follow the rules that if they do declare such an interest in any item, that they should not participate in the discussion, not participate in the vote, and should in fact leave the room or switch themselves off and mute whilst that discussion takes place. Are there any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda this evening? I don't see any hands up or anyone coming in on audio, so I take it the answer to that is no. Move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is minutes of the council, to approve as a correct record of the minutes. Councillor Purcell, you wish to make a comment on that item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for bringing me in. It's just on item 3. It says 10th of December 2002. It should be 2020 instead of 22. I wish it was 22.
You fancy yourself back in the Roman period, do you?
I think so.
It's an item on the agenda, not on the minutes themselves. Thank you very much, Councillor Purcell. Can we put our hand down unless we're going to speak? Councillor Ahmed.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just a point about minute number 32 regarding the General Fund Revenue Budget. The minutes record the fact on page, toward the top of page 4, that a copy of the amendment was circulated prior to the meeting, which is correct. The minutes don't reflect the fact that the proposals of the Labour group and Liberal Democrat group were also circulated prior to the meeting. So that's the first inclusion I would like to see within the minutes. And the second mention I would like to see in the minutes, which should be, is the fact that the joint budget wasn't circulated prior to the meeting. So I would like that to be included within the minutes to make sure that is the correct version of how the meeting took place.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. I'm not sure about the inclusion of the second item that you call there. Are we talking, are you actually referring to the joint budget amendment that was submitted?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of this, there's two separate issues. One is the initial proposals of each group, which were circulated. So there's no mention within the minutes that they were circulated. I know they're within the group in the report, and it's attached to in the appendix. But then there's also no mention of the fact that the amendment or the joint budget proposal wasn't circulated prior to the meeting. So that isn't mentioned within the minutes. Whereas on page 4, correctly, the minutes do mention the fact that our budget proposals were circulated. So I think to make sure it's accurately reflected as to what happened, that needs to be recorded within the minutes.
Advice that I'm getting from the chair here, and as you appreciate, I am sat in the Wilson room with advisors. It is that the minutes do include all the options that were considered by council, either pre-circulated or not, and that the minutes themselves do comply with all the legal procedures that are required by council.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Iqbal.
Yeah, I think Mr. Councillor Witt was before me, so I'm happy to give way to him first.
Apologies, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Whip, I mistook your reply for that of Councillor Iqbal. That's my error. I apologise for that. Councillor Whip.
Mr. Mayor, can I agree with Councillor Ahmed? I think it would be entirely appropriate for all three of the budget proposals that were tabled in advance of the meeting to be included within the minutes as appendices, and so I would concur with that. Could I just say, Mr. Mayor, that the resolution that was passed differed from our proposal in the sum of £88,000, which was in respect of the ACE Centre, and that apart from that, it's exactly the same as what we put forward prior to the meeting. So yeah, let's have all three sets of proposals included within the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. Councillor Iqbal.
It's okay, Mr. Mayor, the point's been raised, so I don't need to labour it again.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, councillors, I am assured that all three proposals are appended to the minutes, and therefore legally the minute itself does not need to be changed. No further comment there. In that case, I will.
Yeah, I've got my hand up, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Ahmed.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments and grateful to Councillor Whip for agreeing to that part in terms of the three proposals to be put forward and included. But the second part of it, in terms of the joint proposal, needs to be made absolutely clear within the minutes that a joint proposal was brought forward at the meeting itself and not prior. I think it's only fair, Mr. Mayor, because mention of it, the prior circulation to our budget is minuted, and I think it's only fair to reflect and be consistent that that's included within the minutes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ahmed, the legal minds that are in the room here at the moment are suggesting that the minutes as they are written are correct and a correct record and that everything is included. I'm going to put it to a vote directly that those minutes are accepted as a true record. And ask, since, you know, I think this is a very specific argument, are there any names who wish to be recorded as dissenting from that acceptance of the minutes?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask that my name be as minuted that I voted against?
If you're asking for that, then we will in fact go to a named vote on that item, and I'll hand you over to the Chief Executive, who will call out the names and record votes accordingly. So the motion is to accept the minutes. If you're for acceptance of the minutes as written and as published, say aye or yes. For. If you're against that, please say no or against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Adam.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Ahmed.
Against.
Councillor Ali.
For.
Councillor Amma.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Musawwar Arshad.
Against.
Councillor Ashraf.
For.
Councillor Aslam. Councillor Aslam.
Against.
Councillor Butterworth.
Against.
Councillor Carroll.
Against.
Councillor Carter.
Against.
Councillor Clegg.
For.
Councillor Coburn Price.
Against.
Councillor Cooney.
Against.
Councillor Crossley. Councillor Crossley.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Foxley M.
Against.
Councillor Foxley P.
Against.
Councillor Goldthorpe.
Against.
Councillor Hanif.
For.
Councillor Hartley.
For.
Councillor Iqbal M.
For.
Councillor Iqbal Y. Councillor Iqbal Y. Councillor Leonti. Councillor Leonti. Councillor Lord.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor McAvoy.
Against.
Councillor McGowan.
Against.
Councillor Mahmood.
For.
Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann. Councillor Mills.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Nixon.
Against.
Councillor Purcell.
Against.
Councillor Saqib.
For.
Councillor Shaw. Councillor Shaw. Councillor Tennant.
For.
Councillor Turner.
Against.
Councillor Waugh.
Against.
Councillor Whip D.
For.
Councillor Whip T.
For.
Councillor Wicks.
For. For.
Councillors, for the first time in the last 2 years whilst I've been sitting in this chair, we have a tied vote where 19 councillors voted for acceptance of the minutes, 19 councillors voted against acceptance of the minutes, which leaves me with the casting vote. And since I'm assured from a legal point of view that everything has been covered and that the minutes as published do recognise the meeting as such, my vote will be for acceptance of the minutes, and therefore the acceptance is carried. And I move on to the next item on the agenda, item 4, which is announcements from the Mayor and the Leader of the Council, if any. I have no further announcements other than the one that I expressed at the very beginning of the meeting, but I do have some comments which I'm not going to mention at the moment. I'll reserve till the very end of the meeting. Councillor Iqbal, any announcements from the Leader?
No announcements, Mr. Mayor, but I assume at the end you will be thanking the retiring councillors. Is that what you're reserving?
I will indeed, as part of my closing comments. Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Item 5 on the agenda is the mayoralty. Councillor Iqbal, as chairman of the group that formulated this particular report, can I call on you to address the issue?
Can, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure whether I was chairman of this group. I think it was Tony who was the chair of the governance working group, if I remember rightly. I mean, I've slept since then, but I'm not too sure. But in terms of the mayoralty, Mr. Mayor, the 3 groups who were represented at that meeting agreed, and this is where the words of wisdom from Tony Greaves came in, where he said, look, back in 1974, when a new council was being sworn in, that the slate was wiped clean in terms of the mayoralty, and it was the unanimous view of all the political parties on the governance working group to support that. So I move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Is there anyone here to second that movement to accept those recommendations? If not, I'll second it from the chair.
Well, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Witt, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, just to second the proposal, Mr. Mayor. The system of each group on the council accumulating it's a point system in accordance with the strength on the council has worked well since it was introduced in the 1970s. It is one of the legacies of Tony's striving to ensure that there's fairness, and clearly we would wish to continue with that. And the proposal to have the largest group appoint the mayor next year and the deputy mayoralty to go to the second largest group follows the pattern that has operated ever since the 1970s, and would ensure a smooth transition with the new numbers and parity and equity and fairness across the board. So I second.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. I have no further hands in the air. Can I take it then that that's a unanimous acceptance of the recommendations?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, councillors. Moving to item 6, questions on notice from the public to the leader. And I understand that we have one question, which I believe has been pre-circulated to all councillors earlier today. Can I check that Liz Hurley, are you online with us this evening to ask that question directly?
I am.
Liz, you have the floor to ask the question, but can I remind you that you must pose the question as you have written it and submitted it to council.
Of course. Good evening, councillors and Mr. Mayor. I know pressure has been placed on you to bear in mind the financial costs to Pendle Council of voting to protect Gibb Hill. Does the council agree with me that having committed yourselves to combating climate change, it would be going against your stated beliefs to support the destruction of that or any other green space to meet an inflated housing target? I believe I'm also entitled to a supplemental question as long as it's relating to that original one. Yes?
Liz, yes, you are entitled to a supplemental, but before you ask that supplemental, I'll ask Councillor Iqbal to respond, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Can I first of all thank Liz for the question. It's refreshing to have questions from members of the public to full council, to the leader, and long may that continue. In direct answer to what Liz is asking, Mr. Mayor, the simple answer would be yes, but and there's always a but with answering. I mean, Liz is quite correct in her opening question where she says, "I know pressure is being placed on the council in terms of our finances." I mean, I don't need to remind councillors and the people of Pendle, Mr. Mayor, what this council, what local government generally, but certainly what this council has suffered in terms of cuts since 2010. And in terms of the housing target numbers, the imposition and pressure that's put on councils and council leaders and councillors by central government is something that the public do not see. And, you know, why should they? They elect us to try and reflect their views, and, you know, many councillors in this chamber do. The issue around combating climate change, clearly this council signed up to the council's, to the climate emergency, and the late Tony Greaves was elected as chairman of that group and Councillor Yvonne Tennant as vice chair, and the climate changing working group has done a lot of good in terms of promoting the climate emergency to councillors across this chamber, and I certainly support the work that they do. But in terms of specifically protecting areas like Gibb Hill, I've been on the council for 23 years, and Gibb Hill has always been a point of conflict ever since I've been on the council. But I think across all political groups, there is a general willingness to work with the people who have put us in this position to try and protect, if not all, but as many of our green spaces as possible. We have to balance the pressures that are put on us from elsewhere, and if we don't sometimes succumb to those pressures, there are consequences which members of the public don't see. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Liz, would you wish to come back on a supplemental question there?
Yes, please, and thank you for that response. In 1859, Charles Blondin set up a tightrope across Niagara Falls and walked across it several times, once with a wheelbarrow full of rocks. He then asked the crowd if they believed he could do it with a person in the wheelbarrow. Yes, all 25,000 of them roared. He then asked for a volunteer and was greeted with silence. If you truly have a belief, your actions will be guided by it. So can I take it that your stated commitment to combating climate change will be followed by action tonight to guarantee to protect Gibb Hill in perpetuity with absolutely no dilution of that aim? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Iqbal, do you wish to respond?
I do, Mr. Mayor, and sorry, I didn't catch whether Liz mentioned the year 1859 or 1959, but if Tony Greaves would have been here, I'm sure he'd have shared the history from 1859 onwards to 2021 with us all, but alas, he's not here. But in terms of Liz's direct question, can I confirm that as council leader? The answer is no, I can't, Liz, because I lead the council. I don't speak on behalf of the other 48 councillors that are present or not present tonight. In terms of protecting Gibb Hill, there's a motion later on. There was a discussion at the Policy and Resources Committee last week where a lot of councillors have expressed their views, and I think members of the public can pertain what the views of councillors are. But if you're asking me, can I give a categorical assurance here and now? I operate in a democracy, and I think councillors may then question my legitimacy if I was suddenly giving guarantees on behalf of the council without having proper consultation with my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Without further discussion on that particular topic, Liz, I doubt that the answer is specifically what you'd hope for, but we can't dwell on that particular topic at this particular meeting. Can I move therefore on to item 7 on the agenda, which is questions on notice, and I don't believe that there are any. Philip shaking his head at me. There are no questions on notice. So moving on to item 8 on the agenda, a report by the leader on the work of the Policy and Resources Committee. Councillor Iqbal, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The report is as set out. I'm happy to take any questions from colleagues.
I see no hands raised, so I take it that we note the report as published and move on to item 9 on the agenda, the post of Chief Financial Officer, which is effectively a Section 151 officer. Councillor Whip, please.
Mr. Mayor, can I move that we note that we have appointed a new Chief Financial Officer. I'm delighted, having chaired the appointment panel, to say that we have got somebody who I think will do an excellent job. And as the report sets out, she's already in post and beavering away on our behalf in the financial affairs of the authority. So welcome Fiona Greenway to the council, and I am sure that she will enjoy every moment of her time with us.
Councillor Whip, thank you very much. For the information of other councillors, Fiona Greenway is in fact present at tonight's meeting, and from the chair, welcome to council. I'm sure that you'll find us a jolly lot. At least we are until the 6th of May, when somebody shakes the bag, and you may get a different bunch of us, but welcome to Pendle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Again, I see no dissent from noting the report and the acceptance of it. Thank you very much indeed, councillors. And move on, therefore, to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Treasury Management Strategy. And to consider the attached report from the Chief Finance Officer, which is Fiona's name on it. A chance to star. Councillor Iqbal. Oh, Councillor Whip again. Sorry. Please excuse me.
It's okay.
All over the place this evening.
As the sort of lead on finance matters, I would move the Treasury Management Strategy. It is an important document. It has been considered by Policy and Resources Committee, and everybody was in full agreement with it. And can I commend the work of, well, perhaps not Fiona so much with this, but certainly which will be in the future. But can I commend the work of officers in ensuring that our funds, such as they are looked after extremely well, and that the prudence displayed is absolutely excellent.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Iqbal, you have your hand in the air.
Yeah, happy to second the recommendations, Mr. Mayor. I think you're muted, Mr. Mayor.
You're right. Can I take it there are no dissenting hands in the air, or no one else wishes to comment on it? Can I take it that the report is noted and that the recommendations accepted by council? Okay, that's unanimous acceptance of that. Thank you very much indeed. Item 11 on the agenda is a consultation on the reorganisation of local government in Cumbria and North Yorkshire, which is quite interesting. Councillor Iqbal.
Indeed, Mr. Mayor, it is interesting, and I'm sure it will be for the people of Cumbria and North Yorkshire. But our council currently has a view which is outlined in option 2A that we don't believe that unitarisation would benefit Pendle. We're not part of Cumbria and North Yorkshire, so I'd move that we just simply note this report, Mr. Mayor, and not offer any comments to our neighbours in North Yorkshire and Cumbria.
Thank you, Councillor Rickwell. Councillor Webb.
Mr. Mayor, I would agree with Councillor Iqbal's first comments, which are that this council has got a policy that opposes the creation of unitary councils, and I would wish that our response to the consultation is on those lines, and that we do indeed comment, because our neighbours in the administrative counties over the border deserve the best local government that they can get, and they're not being well served by the creation of mega authorities where the local voices will be lost. And just as a reminder, Mr. Mayor, this is exactly the sort of thing that the leadership of Lancashire County Council wished to force upon us, and had it not been a change of heart in part by central government, we would be in exactly the same boat at this point as those poor folk in North Yorkshire and Cumbria are at the moment. So I would move, Mr. Mayor, that
We've gone to mute.
Councillor Whitney,
I would
come on mute.
Yeah, I would suggest that we respond in terms that we reaffirm our opposition to creation of unity councils, and express the view that Cumbria and North Yorkshire would be better served by remaining that position too.
Thank you, Councillor Whitney. Councillor Rickwell, are you prepared to accept that?
Yes, I'll withdraw my notion of noting it, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second what Councillor Whip has moved.
Thank you very much. Councillor Atman.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to second Councillor Iqbal and note the report.
There's nothing to second, Chairman.
I think we're a little bit late now to sequence now on that particular one.
Councillor Iqbal's withdrawn his motion and seconded Councillor Whip, so there isn't a motion to second.
Councillor Iqbal has withdrawn that motion that you wish to second, Councillor Atman. So we revert to the motion proposed by Councillor Whip, seconded by Councillor Iqbal. Yeah. Are there any dissenters to that motion as it stands?
Chairman, if that's the case, can I move the amendment that we note the report, Mr. Mayor, and leave it to them authorities to make their decision?
Do you have a seconder, Councillor Ahmed?
I'll second. I will second.
Sorry, who? Councillor Kilburn Price. I think I heard your dulcet tones in there somewhere.
Thank you. I'm prepared to second.
Thank you. In which case, we go to a vote on the amendment, which is simply to note the report. Those in favour, will you... I don't think we need a name vote, do we? We can just go straight... Oh, we go to a name vote. In that case, we will go to a name vote. Apologies, people. I'll hand over again to the Chief Executive to call the roll. If you're in favour of simply noting the report, please say aye or yes. If you are against simply noting the report, please say no or against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Adam.
Against.
Councillor Adams.
Again.
Councillor Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Ali.
Against.
Councillor Amma.
Against.
Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Musawa Arshad.
For.
Councillor Ashraf.
For.
Councillor Aslam. Councillor Aslam.
For.
For. Councillor Butterworth.
For.
Councillor Carroll.
For.
Councillor Carter.
For.
Councillor Clegg.
Against.
Councillor Coburn-Price.
For.
Councillor Cooney.
For.
Councillor Crossley. Councillor Crossley.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Foxley M.
For.
Councillor Foxley P.
For.
Councillor Goulthorpe.
For.
Councillor Hanif.
Against.
Councillor Hartley.
Against.
Councillor Iqbal M.
Against.
Councillor Iqbal Y.
Against.
Councillor Leonti. Councillor Leonti. Councillor Lord.
Against.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor McAvoy.
For.
Councillor McGowan.
For.
Councillor Mahmood.
Against.
Councillor Mann.
Against.
Councillor Mills.
Against.
Councillor Newman.
Against.
Councillor Nixon.
For.
Councillor Purcell. Councillor Saqib.
Against.
Councillor Shaw.
For. Against. Sorry.
You got that against? Tennant.
Against.
Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Wall.
For.
Councillor Whip D.
Against.
Councillor Whip T.
Against.
And Councillor Wicks. Councillor Wicks.
Against.
Councillors, the voting on the amendment was 21 votes for the amendment, 20 votes against the amendment. So the amendment is carried. Thank you very much. Can we move therefore on to item Can we move therefore on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 12, the pay policy statement. And Councillor Iqbal, you have your hand in the air.
Yeah, move the pay policy statement to set out, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whip.
Second that.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further hands in the air wishing to speak on the matter, so I take it that we are looking again at a unanimous acceptance of the pay policy statement. Thank you, councillors. This point, we therefore move on to notices of motion, item 13 on the agenda. I think most of them are as published in the agenda papers. Can I therefore call on Councillor Whip to move the notice of motion 13A, levelling up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've put the motion up on screen, and I will go through it. You'll note that this was due to be seconded by Councillor Tony Greaves, and in his stead, Councillor Brian Newman will second it. So the first sentence is that Council notes the government stated objective to level up disadvantaged areas, but notes that recent announcements offer little prospect of genuine levelling up deprived areas such as we have here in Pendle. Council finance settlements from government continue to penalise areas with low valuations, leading to council tax hitting those in the poorest areas hardest. And the impact of austerity is still being felt for authorities like Pendle Council. One-off funding opportunities represent only a fraction of the funding that we've lost to our area in recent years, and financial mechanisms such as New Homes Bonus rob the poor to pay the rich. Council therefore resolves to request the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer to consider and implement effective changes to genuinely level up conditions for people in Pendle. And in speaking to that, Mr. Mayor, I would particularly highlight the iniquity of the New Homes Bonus, where the government many years ago now top sliced the financial settlements that they give to councils in order to distribute that funding in a different way. And it really does rob the poor to pay the rich. It takes funding away from areas like ours and gives it to areas such as those in the southeast that have a housing boom, and rewards those areas which are more affluent than ours, let's put it that way. The impact of the council tax is such that, again, those areas with the lowest council tax valuations, residents end up having to pay more than those in the richer areas with higher valuations. It's perverse. And there are all sorts of ways in which funding, government funding continues to disadvantage the most deprived areas. Mr. Mayor, I believe it's absolutely imperative that we do have a genuine levelling up, and I do hope that this resolution, together with those from councils elsewhere in the country, will ensure that we see that we get a fair deal on the funding front, and that our residents don't continue to suffer such unaffordable increases in council tax and the continued cuts that we see in local government services. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. Councillor Iqbal. Oh, sorry, Councillor Newman. I apologise. I believe you're going to second the motion.
I certainly will second the motion, Mr. Mayor. We need a far better levelling up than we are getting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll certainly be supporting the motion as set out and moved by Councillor Whip. And let me just share with you, Mr. Mayor, since the COVID pandemic started in March, obviously Pendle has been in the most strictest and longest restrictions, arguably, in the country. And what has happened is that back in October 2020, I, representing our borough, was part of a negotiating team with the Prime Minister's right-hand man, Sir Edward Lister. And I've still got the letter, and I keep referring to it. And I remember his words to leaders across Lancashire, but my focus was in my borough, that said, look, we will make sure that we deal with the disadvantages and disproportionate impact of COVID, and you will not have to worry about budgets going forward, and you will not have to worry about this, that, and the other. And as part of one of the conditions was that he agreed, or the government agreed, to set up a ministerial working group. And again, I've been privileged to be part of the working group on behalf of district leaders across Lancashire. And we've had a number of meetings, of which the last one was earlier this week with Minister Paul Scully, who was tasked by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to work with Lancashire leaders about levelling up. And one of the things that I said to him last month, Mr. Mayor, and he said that, look, the budget is coming along. You don't need to, I'm just paraphrasing now, you don't have to worry about funding. The Chancellor will look after areas like Pendle and will level up. So, naturally excited, Mr. Mayor, I watched the budget in its entirety for the first time in many a year, because usually it's doom and gloom for areas like Pendle. And I generally thought that the Chancellor was going to stand up and announce that areas like Pendle would be levelled up. But I was deeply disappointed, Mr. Mayor, and made my disappointment known to the Minister earlier this week when last month he was talking about a £2 billion pot of money. And on a serious note, I'd said to him, look, if there's £2 billion that the government want to share, I don't want to wait for the budget. Get that shared now. Because, Mr. Mayor, you've seen and colleagues have seen and the people of Pendle have seen time after time, certainly over the last 12 months, that COVID has laid bare the disadvantaged and disproportionate effect in which this government has dealt with areas like Pendle. And why is it, Mr. Mayor, that in 2021, in modern Britain, we're suffering with child poverty? That is not fair on our children, Mr. Mayor. And why is it in 2021, in so-called modern Britain, that food banks are being relied upon, not by, as some political people would call scroungers? They're not scroungers, Mr. Mayor. These are desperate people who want to put food on the table for themselves, their families and their children. And it's not on that for the government, for time and time again, to be kicking our area in the teeth. There needs to be a levelling up agenda, and the levelling up needs to be serious. But again, the prospectus has come out, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Nixon asked me a question at the Policy and Resources Committee about the levelling up. The government wants shovel-ready projects up to £20 million. Well, £20 million may sound a lot of money to some people, Mr. Mayor. It's a lot of money to me as an individual. But if you want to really deal with some of the deep-rooted issues in this borough, government need to. We shouldn't have to bid for money. We should be just given the money as local authorities to deal with some of the issues that need affecting. So I would urge every member of this council that if they care about their community, if they don't want to see more children, more people dying due to poverty, support this motion tonight, Mr. Mayor, and let's get a message to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Ahmed?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think the levelling up agenda gives local authorities an opportunity to get some further funding to deal with some of the issues which we face, which are well documented, and some of these have been mentioned. I think I don't want to be totally negative on this motion. I will be supporting it, but I think we need to take a slightly more positive role. There's always, of course, there's always more that can be done, and there's always more funding that we need. But this is a start, and I think it's something which I'm happy to support based on the basis of the levelling up fund. I think in principle, in theory, yes, it's a good idea, but I also accept the argument that more needs to be done and more can be done. So for that reason, I think I will be supporting the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. I don't see any further hands. Can we go straight to the decision, if you like, that is a unanimous acceptance of the notice of motion as laid out? No dissent. Thank you very much indeed. The motion therefore is accepted. Moving on then to 13B, the Gibb Hill Community Asset Transfer. And to move the motion, Councillor Nixon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For over 20 years, some say more, the land at Gibb Hill has had a big question mark hanging over it. Tonight, that question mark could be removed for good. Various unrelated events have led us to this point. The public consultation on the local plan, part 2, has focused a spotlight on various parcels of land all over the borough, and of course, our annual housing target, which will be debated in a later motion. It is clear that during COVID, residents have been out in the glorious upland countryside that forms most of beautiful Pendle, more than ever. Families have told us just how much they value our rich network of walking and cycling routes that we are blessed with right on the fringes of our town. Physical, mental and emotional well-being has never been higher up on the nation's agenda. Gibb Hill is just one of these sites. But, as was highlighted at Policy and Resources Committee last week, this biodiverse site was included in the plan to regenerate Nelson. Rightly, all councillors got behind Councillor Tennant's motion to take this plot out of the Nelson Master Plan. The reason we could do this, and not the same for other sites, is that Pendle Borough Council owns the land. Gibb Hill has been called the Green Lung, separating Nelson and Colne, and for once this is not hyperbole. It was originally bought by Lancashire County Council for school playing fields back in the 1960s, but those bureaucrats clearly never left Preston because those gradients utterly preclude sports. So, for over 50 years, uncertainty has reigned. What has changed? Hillside Heroes has been formed as a charity dedicated to promoting and enhancing our Pendle upland landscape with the additional aim of acquiring and managing in perpetuity Gibb Hill. It will mean an end to all the uncertainty and that this public land can be used for the public good forever. On the Hillside Heroes management team is John Lamb from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust and other specialists who manage nature reserves or who worked for the Environment Agency. They have compiled all the ecological survey data on Gibb Hill, and it is clear that this is patchy. Gibb Hill has not been managed correctly, most especially by a council that has called a climate emergency. Hillside Heroes, which has over 300 members, built up in a remarkably short space of time, has also created a business plan stretching out into 2026. Managing the land and its access properly is not cheap. The next 5 years are estimated to cost £217,465 plus VAT, or £43,493 plus VAT per year on average. Realistically, this will be an administrative and financial burden on any town council. But if Gibb Hill is saved, we want it to be properly looked after, don't we? For this reason, the Hillside Heroes charity has researched grant-making bodies and has uncovered 17 grants it could apply to once its banking is secured. Charities are better placed to access these monies than councils. Hillside Heroes would want to work with the community and will be happy to work with town councils and other bodies. In fact, the first thing it would plan to do, assuming the vote tonight is in favour of community asset transfer, would be a full public consultation on long-term management options. Sadly, the public sector doesn't always cover itself in glory when caring for heritage or green spaces. Many would say this is because of constrained budgets, but I think it is really focus. Hillside Heroes offers Gibb Hill and indeed other green spaces both focus and expertise. What's not to like with a plan that secures Gibb Hill for future generations and takes no revenue from this council and the town councils? Mr. Mayor, I move.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor McGowan, are you seconding this motion?
I'm seconding it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Turner, you were first to put your hand in the air.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I, as you know, and as everyone on this council knows, and I draw reference to the leader's comments to Liz Hurdley, that he will protect as many of our green spaces as possible, and I am all for protection of green space and for the public's use of these green space. However, and the proposer did draw reference to the local plan, and I would draw reference to the local plan myself. If we agree to this motion this evening, that will be taking out of the local plan an indication of houses that have already been designed and delegated for the local plan. Now, that means that other spaces will have to be found. That will include areas like Barrowford. Now, Barrowford has some beautiful and some wonderful green space, Mr. Mayor, that hasn't got the privileges of being owned by this council. And of course, there will be proper areas that are well desirable to developers and to people who wish to live and move into this area. However, Mr. Mayor, if one looks quite seriously on the local plan to the indication of the revised distribution of new housing, one sees in Barrowford that we are already being subject to a development of 500 houses on Trough Lane, which took out a green space, but none of those 500 houses have been put into the new housing in Pendle, but instead we have the privilege, you may say, of having yet another 244 houses to be built in Barrowford, which takes out our green spaces, Mr. Mayor, and our green spaces, Mr. Mayor, are equally as valuable as Gibb Hill. And I would like to see all of these spaces retained. What I would like to see, I would be happy to support this if we could have an assurance that instead of trying to devour the green spaces that we have in Pendle, and especially in Barrowford, and we perhaps recycle the brownfield sites, we recycle the surplus of office accommodation and retail accommodation that will not be utilised after this terrible pandemic, and that recycling will bring the houses that we need to meet into the government's requirements for housing, rather than devouring all these green fields. Ideally, of course, we should put the strategic housing site of 500 against Barrowford to show how Barrowford is already overcommitted. Mr. Mayor, I would love to support this motion, but as I see it as a danger and a damage to towns like Barrowford, I'll have to seriously consider my decision. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I didn't detect in your commentary there any kind of amendment at all to the original. So I will therefore just move on to the next speaker, which is Councillor Whip, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have an amendment, and I'll put it up on screen. Mr. Mayor, I hope that that's showing the council notes the need to protect, promote, enhance and manage. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So the amendment is to replace the text as follows after the council notes. The council notes the need to protect, promote, enhance and manage the natural upland environment in Pendle, including areas such as Gibb Hill. Council also notes the resolution passed at Policy Resources Committee that discussions be held with Colne Town Council, Nelson Town Council and any other interested community group to transfer the land at Gibb Hill, Nelson as a community asset transfer and looked after in perpetuity. Council recognises that Gibb Hill is a green lung for residents of Pendle and endorses consideration of the land at Gibb Hill being enhanced ecologically and for the public good. Council therefore resolved to support the resolution of the Policy and Resources Committee and instructs the Chief Executive to report back accordingly at the earliest opportunity. Mr. Mayor, I fully endorse the sentiments behind the people enthusiastically wanting to protect Gibb Hill, and as a council and as part of a Liberal group that has attempted to protect Gibb Hill over many years, we are not going to change our spots. However, I think there are some fundamental flaws with the motion as put, and I'll just elaborate as to what I think they are. First of all, I don't think that within the legislation for community asset transfers, we could make a decision tonight that just said, right, we're going to community asset transfer, full stop. The legislation requires the guidance that was issued by the government when the legislation came out, that if this council has to do risk assessments and ensure that everything is appropriate prior to making a decision. And clearly we're not in that position at the moment. Hillside Heroes is a new body set up within a matter of the last couple of weeks. It hasn't got a track record, and according to the terms of the resolution, it hasn't got trustees. The resolution talks about proto trustees, and I think Jonathan, Councillor Nixon, just said it hasn't got a bank account. So I think such talk is honestly premature. The second issue, and I've dealt with bodies that have been set up to undertake work community for community benefit, and they set off full of enthusiasm. But we are talking here about, if we talk about in perpetuity, we're talking about forever. And in those circumstances, you need to have something that has got longevity. And I think that town councils, because they are statutory bodies, they can't be done away with at a whim, have that length of time and that solidity which provides a basis for a community asset transfer that will last. And it's only within the last couple of weeks that I convened a meeting with the trustees of another organisation in Pendle that were given land to look after forever. And after just 20 years, they are struggling to ensure that the necessary work is done on the land. And another example of...
Councillor Whip, you're out of time. Can you wrap up, please, in 1 second?
In terms of nature reserves, we have got 5 existing. They're struggling for volunteers. So I think we need to take a sensible look at this. Fully support protecting Gibb Hill, but let's do it the right way. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. Do you have a seconder for that amendment, please?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy.
Sorry if I jumped in.
Oh, sorry, go on, Dot.
I'm happy to second that.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Lord. Councillor Iqbal, you have your hand in the air.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I shall be supporting the amendment moved by Councillor Whip and seconded by Councillor Dorothy Lord. I mean, I obviously chaired Policy and Resources Committee last week, and there seemed to be there was a unanimous agreement amongst all the political parties about the resolution that was moved at Policy and Resources. Therefore, I'm surprised that Councillor Nixon has pursued his motion this evening because, Mr. Mayor, certainly since 2010, this council, Pendle Council, has got a proud track record of transferring a lot of our assets to town and parish councils and to other community groups. But this is an asset, and as Councillor Nixon's motion talks about, is the green lung between Nelson and Corn. It's something that's important to virtually everybody that's had the pleasure of seeing it or even not seeing it. And I want to commend those people that have started the group, the Protect Pendle's Countryside, because I think what the work that people are doing across Pendle is worthy and will hopefully bring some fruition. Well, Mr. Mayor, 1 or 2 quick points. In terms of the custodianship of areas like Gibb Hill, I believe that the town councils are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The town councils are fully constituted bodies and have got a record. And one of the reasons a lot of us were advocating transferring, for example, the parks that we've got and a lot of other green spaces that we've got to town and parish councils was that if at some point in the future the government, or any government for that matter, decides to create super councils or gobbles up Pendle, then there is a real risk that if we are governed from Preston or Blackburn or somewhere else, that areas like Gibb Hill would be ripe for development. And as little Pendle, we would have very little say in it. But the town and parish council would still exist even if there was unitarisation. The second point is, Mr. Mayor, and this is a technical point, that even if this council wants to transfer the land to the town councils or to anybody else for that matter, because the land value is more than £2 million, it has to be approved by the Secretary of State. The policy committee or the full council of this council cannot approve just to transfer it full stop. So that's an important point for me, that if we look to transfer something to a new group that is recently being set up, and I was asked, I think, by Liz Hurley, who spoke earlier, would I want to become a member of Hillside for Heroes? And I said, yes, I would. But I've had nothing since then in terms of, what the group does, how it's going to operate and what have you. So I would urge, in fact, in the interests of unanimity, as happened last week, Mr. Mayor, that Councillor Nixon withdraws his motion and supports the amendment. And it's a constructive amendment that was agreed by Councillor Nixon's colleagues last week. And that was refreshing, that despite us being politicians in an election season, there was something that we could agree on. I certainly don't want us to fall out over this, but I think, Mr. Mayor, there needs to be some thought into this to deal with some of the really key crunch issues. Emotions are very good and very short term. When the dust settles, Mr. Mayor, the last thing that I want is for that land in future years, for me to have no control if I'm re-elected to the council, to have no control about it, because it'll become a private entity then. I can apply pressure to the town and parish councils and hold them to account as elected people, as a resident of Nelson, for example. And I would urge Councillor Nixon to withdraw his motion firstly, in the spirit of cooperation. If he's not minded to, I would urge people to vote for the amendment, and really let's get down to the nitty-gritty, because the motion says talk to the parish councils and other community group, which includes Hillside Heroes, Protect Pendle's Countryside, and anybody else that's interested. So it's a bigger group rather than being in isolation. You've got more brains around the table, or the virtual table, Mr. Mayor. So I would urge people to do as I've indicated. Thank you very much, sir. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Coburn-Price.
I would probably wonder whether 30 acres or so of rough grazing is worth £2 million outside Nelson. Surely it's only possible to be worth in the £1 million level if it could be built on as housing. And of course, none of us know that in this room, well, in this virtual room. Hillside Heroes, rather bizarrely and amazingly, has become a charity in no time at all. So it does have a constitution and trustees. It does not have a bank account. I have seen that documentation and a rather scary business plan, which is an analysis by experts like John Lamb, who have looked at all the problems with the site from an access perspective. So the paths are, well, they need major investment. There is a lot of concern about the way that the grassland is being managed for ecological diversity. And I feel that if you are going to do this, if anybody is going to look after this land, it has to be looked after properly. And one problem that I foresee is that, you know, one of the things that's been levelled at this group is that they're all keen now. And I would say that town councils will be all keen now too. But we know, because we're councillors, that we have an amazing list of things to spend money on. And in the terms of the town councils, it's Christmas lights, it's benches, it's events, it's sudden things that happen. It's the town hall roof is leaking. And it's very, very difficult. It's like anybody's household finances. Sometimes priorities shift, and sometimes there are reasons why priorities shift. The thing about Hillside Heroes is that is their only priority. So obviously the amendment shows that they would have a seat at the table, but already they are the thought leaders in managing this kind of land for ecology and for biodiversity. And I feel that they should be the leaders, and the detail of whether perhaps they offer town councillors a seat as on their board of trustees, rather like Pearl works, for example, at the moment, that can be sorted out down the line, can't it? We can come to that during all of those discussions. As a person who used to be chairman of Town Council, I know that it's actually a long, drawn-out process. There are lots of things to look into, whether you're transferring playgrounds or town halls or indeed the Pendle Heritage Centre. So it's not as if Mr Moosdale would be ringing anybody up, whether it's Cone Town Council, Nelson Town Council or Hillside Heroes next week, and saying, I've got the paperwork and it's in the post ready for signing. There'll be lots of discussions and they will take months. And I think it's right that they take months because it's right that we get it right. But we're very fortunate that somebody else outside the council has done all this legwork, created a repository of detailed information, including a plan, and given a starter for 10 for any group to take this forward. And that's to be celebrated. So I support Councillor Nixon, but I still support the motion that I voted for at PNR last week as well.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn-Price. Councillor Zafar Ali, please.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor, I think Councillor Brian Newman's trying to come in.
Hello. I've had my hand up for quite a while, but I don't think it's been noticed.
Who? Sorry.
Councillor McGowan.
Is that Councillor McGowan?
It is, yes. I've had my hand up for some time. I've been patient, but I don't think you've noticed my hand up.
There's been a number of hands up.
Councillor McGowan, yes. I do recognise that your hand is there, but as the seconder to the, I do appreciate that you can speak. I haven't forgotten you. You might forgive me, but it's a very complex issue. There are quite a number of councillors who have had their hand up for equally as long amount of time as well. I'm trying to deal with it, if you like, in terms of some kind of balance between the political parties, but I will not forget you, Councillor McGowan. You will be called in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zafar Ali, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, in relation to the motion as set out, I do have a number of reservations with the original motion. I will be supporting colleagues on the amendment to this motion, and I also speak with my other hat on as Chairman of Nelson Town Council. We have, in fact, begun with setting the balls in motion with regards to the transfer of land at Gibb Hill. We've also expressed an appetite and intention to deal with land at Halifax Road in Nelson, which also has similar issues, whilst fantastic effort has been made with the various community groups over the past few weeks, years, and in fact, in some cases, a lot longer than a couple of years. Some of this is historic. In terms of, for example, the land at Gibb Hill, the Town Council has already resolved at its last full council meeting, which is an expression of its interest and appetite. So whilst I appreciate Councillor Sarah Cockman-Price's view that priorities shift, right about now the priorities are correct in terms of, and insofar as Nelson Town Council goes, our priority right now is to protect green space, hence the resolution that was passed at the Town Council. So I'd urge colleagues to support the amendment. And I say this with respect to councillors. There just seems to be a hint of scaremongering in terms of time lapse, etc. The time is now for us to make the decisions to protect these green spaces. And whilst I appreciate various different community forums trying to make the correct and right decisions to move this along, I think the safe pair of hands for this would be to keep this under local government control, and one of them being Nelson Town Council. Of course, there will be future discussions around Halifax Road and the site at Halifax Road in Nelson, and that may well come back to a future meeting of this council. So once again, I'd urge colleagues to support the amendment to this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Councillor Tommy Cooney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to leave my camera off if you don't mind. It seems to impact my Wi-Fi connectivity when I put the camera on. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to keep this quite brief. But when I first became a councillor back in 2012, the first hot topic I walked into was Gibb Hill and the panic around residents and the future of Gibb Hill. And I quickly realised the importance of Gibb Hill to the local community and the wider residents of Pendle as well. And I'm very proud to say that I stood right from the beginning on the premise that I would never support any sort of development or any sort of sale of Gibb Hill. And I stood on Gibb Hill, yes I did, and I had the pictures taken, yes I did, and I had him in my leaflets, yes I did. But so did other councillors of other parties, Mr. Mayor, doing exactly the same thing. And Mr. Mayor, I thought tonight would never actually come and arrive where I would get the opportunity to vote to protect Gibb Hill once and for all, no ifs, no buts, done job, hit the bullseye, done what we promised we would do for the residents. And I'm proud to be able to do that tonight, Mr. Mayor. And shame on other councillors that have stood on Gibb Hill and took photos and put them on their leaflets and say they protect Gibb Hill. They don't want houses to be put on Gibb Hill. Well, tonight is your chance to vote for that and put your vote where your mouth is. Mr. Mayor, there was issues raised about fundamental flaws around Hillside Heroes being a group that's set up recently. Yeah, they are a new group, but just have a look at the group. Look at the membership. Look at the constitution. Look how professional they are. This just hasn't been made up on a whim. So I remember, Mr. Mayor, not so long ago, and I think County Councillor Ali is on the meeting tonight. He was going to make Gibb Hill into a community asset transfer. I don't remember any outrages about fundamental flaws of constitutions, of who's behind it, what's the risk if it all goes wrong. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. And if I want to take that forward, I'll happily support that. But, Mr. Mayor, I worry about a comment that Councillor Zafar Ali has just made. Now, I think it's just contradicted the whole resolution that was passed at Policy and Resources, because he's just said the ball has already started rolling in terms of transfer it to Nelson Town Council. Well, that's looks like to me the decision's already made to cut out communication and engagement at any community groups. So I see a hidden agenda here, and that's what I'm seeing. But you know what, Mr. Mayor? The residents will see that hidden agenda, and if councillors think they won't, well, councillors are very, very silly. So I would also wonder why Councillor Zafar Ali is, not sort of singing the praises of Victoria Park and get that under control, and some other things the Nelson Town Council should be doing, and they're quite clearly not. So, Mr. Mayor, I can't understand tonight why the councillors will not support this motion. They talk about supporting Gibb Hill, protecting Gibb Hill. This is the opportunity to support Gibb Hill once and for all and give it to an organisation that will protect it for the future. Any concerns about what will happen in the future can be protected under legality, documents. The legal team can do all that. Lancashire Wildlife Trust can be brought in if anything goes wrong. That can all be put to bed. That's just smoke and mirrors that can't be done. So, Mr. Mayor, the councillors that have stood on Gibb Hill and took photographs and will not vote for this amendment, I say shame on them, but the residents won't forget that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution there, Councillor Cooney. It wasn't as short as you originally promised us that it was going to be. You just scraped in under the 5-minute rule. Councillor Tennant, please.
Okay. There's a couple of issues need addressing, really. Councillor Zafar Ali didn't say that at all. That's one thing. Myself, I actually went to Nelson Town Council to discuss this at Nelson Town Council full meeting, which was several weeks ago. What Councillor Zafar Ali is saying that Nelson Town Council has already started discussions with the council, and that was quite some time ago. If Councillor Cooney had been at Policy and Resources last week, I'm sure he would have heard exactly what was being said. The other thing is, there's been a few statements tonight that, I'm a member of Hillside Heroes and I'm a member of Protect Pendle's Countryside, and I have been for some time. But like Councillor Iqbal said, I joined Hillside Heroes, and then I just got a thank you for joining, and other than that I know nothing about it. That was a couple of weeks back. The couple of statements that have been made are that they have got the charitable status. No, they haven't. They've got approval to apply for charitable status. The Charities Committee says they try to get through it in 5 months. That's if there are no issues. I've been involved with charities setting up before. Sometimes it can take even up to a couple of years. So I think to say that they're already a charity is misleading. I will be voting for the amendment because I don't think the best way to go forward with this is for one group to have absolute control. It needs to be a collaboration. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. I have several hands here that have already spoken on this, and I'd like to do a clean-up of the list. Councillor Zafar Ali, will you put your hand down, please? You can't come back into this discussion.
I do have a point to reply to.
I'm sorry, Councillor Ali. The rules of debate say that you've had your chance to say your piece. Can you take your hand off my list, because I've got so many hands up that I'm getting a little confused here.
Mr. Mayor, you're on mute. You're on mute, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, that's cleaned my list up a little. Councillor McGowan, I will bring you in right at the end. No, I'll bring you in right now then. If that's, your wish, you can speak on the amendment only.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, I would just like to give the residents of Nelson and Colne a voice, as it's been a very hot topic on social media. So basically, I'll start with some councillors on this council seem to think that the council was created to provide them with position. I think their position exists to provide the electorate with a voice, and I'm sat here hoping that their voices are heard tonight. Over this week, I've received over 50 emails and messages from residents asking councillors to do the right thing, and that is to vote and put Gibb Hill in the hands of a trust, Hillside Heroes, and not a town council. As you are aware, if we as councillors vote to transfer the asset to town council's hands, in 10 years, either one could sell their part off. I don't think residents know that, but it's true. And the promises of an administration today might not be upheld in decades to come, which in turn will bring this debate full circle, and residents will have to fight for Gibb Hill all over again. So council colleagues, here's your moment in Pendle's history to do the right thing, and to do what the electorate is asking of you, and that is to put Gibb Hill in the hands of a trust, not a corporation. And please think carefully before you vote, as residents have been fighting for this green lung for more than 2 decades. You really need to get on board with this and think about your actions. You've all stood there, had your photos, like Councillor Cooney says. You need to act now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McGowan. Councillor Tom Whip, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor McGowan said to think before you vote. I think it's worth noting that both Councillor McGowan and Councillor Cooney both voted in January to have Gibb Hill added to the local plan, which they've somehow forgotten about here tonight. I am speaking as my seat as the chairman of Bonalswick Town Council. Our town council has received a lot of asset transfers from Pendle Council, and we are very grateful for this. They provide a great asset for the people of Bonalswick. And as part of that, we have seen local charities take on board the works of maintaining these sites to a higher standard than Pendle Council would have otherwise done. Notably, the work of Bonalswick in Bloom, who has seen a great increase in civic pride, most notably, I think, in the War Memorial area, and the Garden for the Blind, which has seen a massive major landwork scheme done to a beautifully high standard. Mr. Mayor, I do see a future where equity sort of split 50-50% to both Con and Nelson Town Councils, and charities getting involved with the councils, with the management. There's nothing stopping that. There's nothing saying that, you know, the town councils have to be solely responsible for that future of the site. And obviously that's something for them to work out themselves. I'm not a member of Colne or Nelson Town Councils. That's not for me to say. But I definitely see something in the future. I know it works from my own perspective as a member of Bonalswick Town Council, and I hope that they see it that way too. Mr. Mayor, I do see the value of land like Gibb Hill. It provides an asset on a non-monetary term. It's just, you know, invaluable to the people of Pendle. And I think that's the note I will end on. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Tom Webb. I'm going to bring back, I'm going to give Councillor Alice Mann a chance to speak, and then I'm going to move to close the debate by going to Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be a disaster if Gibb Hill was ever built on, and I think that would be the opinion of most people here. As far as it being considered in the local plan, I'm amazed that it actually was. I've spent a day, well, many days walking around the area, and the views are absolutely wonderful. And I think the setting up of this community group is fantastic. Great news. However, it is very new, only weeks old. And I really don't know what it's about. I've not sat down with any of the representatives or had any information given to me. And that is the problem. I think they're trying to run before they can walk. So I would suggest that it's better at this moment to accept the suggestion, the amendment by Councillor Whip, so that the councils can enter into talks with every interested group, rather than being bound to a transfer of this asset to one particular group. That doesn't make sense at this particular point in time to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed slid his hand in there right at the very last minute. Councillor Ahmed, I'll give you an opportunity to speak, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Whip to respond in terms of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to listen to all the debate. I did put my hand up, but put it down again. There was too many hands. So anyway, in terms of, I mean, it's been a very good debate, and rightly so. It's been discussed in great detail, the pros and cons, and it's good to have such a debate on such an important issue where so many of our residents are really concerned about this site, and they are worried about future potential development on this site, and it's important that we do listen to our residents and protect this site once and for all. I'm totally in favour of the motion which is moved by Councillor Nixon and seconded by Councillor McGowan. The point being made in terms of what was discussed at the P&R. Since the P&R, we've had our group meeting, and Councillors Nixon, McGowan and others have raised a number of arguments as to why this motion should be brought before us, hence why we have brought this motion to this meeting. And I would urge all members across all political groups to support the motion as set out. And I will make a request to Councillor Whip to please kindly withdraw his motion so we can show support here and now for our residents and to make sure this site is protected. I mean, a number of arguments have been made as to why it should be handed over to possibly to the town councils. I personally have a number of concerns regarding that. Firstly, how the land is to be divided in terms of the boundary between Nelson and Colne. We will be faced with a situation where each area could look after their land in a different way. I don't want to sound disrespectful, but if you look at some of the responsibilities taken over by Nelson Town Council, for example, the bus shelters, our parks, which have been mentioned, if you look at some of the state of the parks in Nelson, they're not up to scratch. How I feel the town council are going to look after such a crucial site, such as Gibb Hill. I feel already, in terms of the town council, they're, how do I word this? I think it's already far stretched in terms of the responsibilities they have taken on. They're struggling to cope with the existing responsibilities. So I would have some real deep and genuine concerns. It's not a political point, which some people might say. I do have some genuine concerns. It's not for me to say.
Councillor Ahmed, you're running out of time.
Yes, it's for members of the public out there to see for themselves the state of our bus shelters. I wouldn't want it in the hands of Nelson Town Council. I would urge all members to support the motion as moved by Councillor Nixon. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Whip, I'll give you an opportunity to summarise on the amendment, and then we'll go to
Councillor Nixon for the response. Yeah, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I just want to make the point, because some councillors have tried to say that this amendment isn't supportive of protecting Gibb Hill, and I'd just like to point out that it is very supportive of protecting Gibb Hill. Picking up on one or two of the other comments, both councillors Cooney and McGowan voted in January to include the land at Gibb Hill in the local plan as housing land, and I did find some of their comments strange given their voting record on this matter. And finally, I said that it was fundamentally flawed for us to be as a council to make a decision on this issue when we haven't gone through the due process as required in law for us to do so. And clearly, if it goes to the Secretary of State and we haven't done things properly, then I think we're in Dickie's Meadow. And finally, Mr. Mayor, local councils, the town councils, are accountable to the public, the people that they represent, and that accountability means that those councillors in the future, and it might be 10 years hence, it might be 100 years hence, will remain accountable. And if the sentiment of their population, their voters, their residents remains as it is now, then they will adhere to what the residents of the day require. And I think that is as good a safeguard as you can get for something held in perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nixon, as the proposer of the original motion, you have the last word here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got no intention of withdrawing the motion. I find it a little bit sad and upsetting that this motion, which is entirely friendly and sensible, has brought us to this with an amendment to it, completely needless. If councillors read the motion it clearly says, accordingly, the council resolves to begin discussions with the Proto trustees of this group. We are beginning discussions. This is not about transferring it all tonight to some unknown body. We're discussing it. We are discussing. Sorry, start again. The motion is to begin discussions. The people behind the Hillside Heroes group are highly experienced individuals in setting up charities and conversing with the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. People will know who the Lancashire Wildlife Trust are. They are part of a national body of wildlife trusts. If, for whatever reason, this new charity, Hillside Heroes, was to collapse at some point in the future, Lancashire Wildlife Trust is there as a backstop. Not the council, not a property developer, the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. How you can't possibly beat that in terms of securing the land in perpetuity. One of the councillors earlier alluded to the fact that the ball is in motion in transferring it to Nelson Town Council. Well, if that's the case, Colne Town Council, of which I am a member, has not been approached for discussion. That's something I don't know where that came from. Councillor Tennant mentioned that the Hillside Heroes is not a charity, correct? However, as of tomorrow, highly likely that will have our charity number. The bank has been applied for, the ball is in motion there. We're not talking about some fly-by-night charity here. This is a proper pucker bona fide body set up to defend this land in perpetuity. And what it's giving is it's giving the people what they want. The amendment kicks the can down the road again. It provides no security. What we're doing here is beginning the discussion with the Proto trustees, opening the door. We're starting to talk about it. And this is why my motion is the one with and not the amendment. And all the councillors here know that. And if this means that the amendment gets in and we as a Conservative group vote against it or abstain, we've voted for building on Gibb Hill. People are sick of politics and sick of politicians and sick of these stupid games. We should vote for this motion and not the amendment. Thank you for letting me come back in, Mr. Mayor. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. I'm going to go to, obviously it will have to be a named vote, and it's a named vote on the amendment as proposed by Councillor Whip.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you are for the amendment, say for. If you are against, say against. Adam.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Ahmed.
Abstain.
Councillor Ali.
For.
Councillor Amma.
For.
I think I heard Councillor Ansar come join the meeting. Councillor Ansar.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Musawa Arshad. Councillor Musawa Arshad.
Abstain.
Councillor Ashraf.
For.
Councillor Aslam.
Against.
Councillor Butterworth.
Against.
Councillor Carroll.
Abstain.
Councillor Carter.
Abstain.
Councillor Clegg.
For.
Councillor Coburn Price.
Abstain.
Councillor Cooney.
Abstain.
Councillor Crossley.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Abstain.
Councillor Foxley M.
Abstain.
Councillor Foxley P.
Abstain.
Councillor Goulthorpe,
Abstain.
Councillor Hanif,
For.
Councillor Hartley, Councillor Iqbal M,
For.
Councillor Iqbal Y,
For.
Councillor Leonti,
He ain't here.
Councillor Leonti,
Abstain.
Councillor Lord,
For.
Councillor McCollum,
Abstain.
Councillor McAvoy,
Abstain.
Councillor McAvoy. I think he's abstained. Councillor McGowan,
Abstain.
Councillor Mahmood,
For.
Councillor Mann,
For.
Councillor Mills,
For.
Councillor Newman,
For.
Councillor Nixon,
Abstain.
Councillor Purcell,
Abstain.
Councillor Saqib,
For.
Councillor Shaw,
For.
Councillor Tennant,
For.
Councillor Turner,
For.
Councillor Waugh,
Abstain.
Councillor Whip D,
For.
Councillor Whip T,
For.
Councillor Wicks.
For. Excuse me. For.
Councillor Turner, if you're still with us, can you take down your hand, please?
I haven't got it up, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, you have. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors, for that. The results of the vote are 23 votes for the amendment, 3 votes against the amendment, 17 abstentions. So the amendment is carried and now becomes the substantive motion. Can I ask the question? I think it's Councillor Nixon who proposed the original. Councillor Nixon, Councillor Ahmed, are you prepared to accept that result, or do we need another named vote, please?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ahmed,
Yeah.
are you in agreement, since we're now, or have a substantive motion which effectively is worded as the amendment?
Yeah.
Are you prepared to accept that, or shall we go to another named vote on the substantive motion which is worded as the amendment?
Yes. So we're just going to vote for the substantive motion. That's fine. Yes. Can we ask for a named vote, please?
Yeah, okay, that's clear now. So we're going to go to another named vote on the substantive motion itself. Thank you kindly. Over to Dean.
So if you are for the substantive motion, which was the amendment, please say for. If you're against, say against. Otherwise, abstain. Councillor Adam.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Ali.
For.
Councillor Amma.
For.
Councillor Ansar.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Mohammed Arshad. Councillor Musawa Arshad.
For.
Councillor Ashraf.
For.
Councillor Aslam.
For.
Councillor Butterworth.
For.
Councillor Carroll.
For.
Councillor Carter.
For.
Councillor Clegg.
For.
Councillor Coburn-Price.
For.
Councillor Cooney.
For.
Councillor Crossley.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Foxley M.
For.
Councillor Foxley P.
For.
Councillor Goulthorpe.
For.
Councillor Hanif.
For.
Councillor Hartley. Councillor Iqbal M.
For.
Councillor Iqbal Y.
For.
Councillor Leonti.
For.
Councillor Lord.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor McAvoy.
For.
Councillor McGowan.
For.
Councillor Mahmood.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For. For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Nixon.
For.
Councillor Purcell.
For.
Councillor Saqib.
For.
Councillor Shaw.
For.
Councillor Tennant.
For.
Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Wall.
For.
Councillor Whip D.
For, and Councillor Mills is saying she didn't hear her name called.
She said for. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Langton. No, I think my computer froze and I didn't actually say anything, but I am going for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whip T.
For.
And Councillor Wicks.
For. For.
Unanimous.
Thank you, councillors. That was a unanimous vote for. That was a very complex and difficult discussion, certainly from my point of view in the chair, trying to control it. I, unfortunately, getting to the age that I am, need to take a comfort break. So can I ask council for 5 minutes to reassemble for continuing the meeting at 9:45, slightly over 5 minutes. Thank you.
resolving, Mr.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we're now back live.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillors, thank you very much. I do beg your indulgence. Time is moving on. Can we move therefore to item 13C, which is a notice of motion for the pandemic, to be moved by Council and Councillor Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to move this motion as set out and just speak briefly on it. Yeah, we're the same, obviously, like every other borough in the country, but we have here the first-hand experiences of everything that's gone on. You know, things that we've never obviously experienced before. You know, people losing their jobs, furlough, people dying, you know, families being affected, food banks like Councillor Iqbal mentioned before, you know, people needing food banks where they probably never have before. So many people affected, and I think everybody has been affected, whether they've had COVID or not. And I'd just like to share with you my not direct experience, but my very, very good friend who was my mayoress died a few weeks ago. She didn't have COVID, but she'd had a slight stroke and she'd fallen and she couldn't manage at home. So she went into a care home while she got back on her feet. This was in November. And while she was in this care home, she then couldn't see her family. She couldn't see her daughters. She couldn't see her 4 grandchildren. She couldn't see her sister. All she saw were strangers. And in February, she spent Christmas Day in there on her own, in her room. She never came out of her room. She wasn't allowed to, because none of the residents had had their vaccinations. And that was it. She was on her first floor. Her sister came every day to bring her stuff, but couldn't see her. She couldn't look through her bedroom window. And she died She died unexpectedly in February, all on her own, totally on her own. And that was, she didn't have COVID, but that's how COVID had that effect on that family. And it was devastating. And everything has been devastating. There is nobody in this country that hasn't been affected by COVID in some way or another. So I would ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lord. Councillor Marjorie Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support what Dorothy's saying and I second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Iqbal.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, absolutely endorse the comments made by Councillor Dorothy Lord in terms of asking Policy and Resources Committee to do something. And clearly, after the elections, whoever chairs that policy committee needs to look at that. If I'm still chairing it, Mr. Mayor, can give Council that assurance that will happen.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. I have no other hands up there, so can we go to a vote then? Can we accept this notice of motion and the recommendation to go to Policy and Resources?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you kindly. Motion accepted then, and we'll move on to the notice of motion on COVID-19 to be moved by Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion reaffirms previous resolutions about COVID-19 in respect of the find, test, trace, isolate, support system and vaccinations. As a council, we have thanked all the staff and volunteers involved with the local primary care network vaccination programme, together with other NHS, public health, council staff and others involved with the fight against COVID-19. All the hard work carried out to deal with these events has nevertheless created growing concerns regarding extra pressure being put on an already stretched NHS and the effect on patients waiting for more routine care. Local GPs and their staff have had to suspend many of their regular activities as resources have been switched to playing their part in the largest vaccination programme in NHS history. There is likely to be a growing number of people wanting to access GP services, which could result in a tidal wave of undetected cancers and other conditions which need urgent attention. For GPs and their staff to handle both the vaccination programme and the growing numbers of people needing medical diagnosis, the situation quite possibly could become unsustainable. For locals accessing the mass vaccination centres in Burnley and Blackburn, this can prove to be problematic. Vaccination centres at Jan Spinners in Nelson, Colne Health Centre and Barnoldswick Medical Centre have proved an accessible local service that will sorely be missed should primary care network staff resume their full range of workloads. I've been led to believe that the GP consortia working in these local accessible centres have given notice that they will cease providing vaccinations once second doses of the 9 priority groups have been completed, thus leaving Pendle people with difficulties. I urge Council to resolve to make strong representations to the health service powers that be for accessible vaccination centres to be set up in Pendle, if at all possible, preferably one of the on the scale of those at Burnley and Blackburn. So I'm going to move this motion as it's set out. However, there will be an added section to the motion which Councillor Tom Whip will explain when he seconds. I move. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mills. Councillor Tom Whitt, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think this motion very clearly sets out that there is a need for GPs to resume their regular services, but it also recognises the fact that vaccinations are very important for people's health in Pendle, and they should be carried out as much as possible within the next few months. Mr. Mayor, the addendum, which is up on screen highlighted in yellow there, sets out that the council notes of the situation of the vaccine rationing, and it also asks that the first dose of vaccinations be resumed in the borough at the earliest possible opportunity. That's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitt. Councillor Turner, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, first of all, can I commend Jan Spinners and can I commend our local GPs? I've had my second vaccination. Thank you very much. And I'm waiting with bated breath for Mrs. Turner to have her second quite soon, I hope. It is unfortunate that in this time and since November, we as an extended family have lost 3 members of the family in hospital in the Midlands, and my sister this week has been downgraded from critical to seriously ill with COVID, having caught COVID in the hospital. So at least I'm pleased to say that in this area, all my close family members in this area have been able to avoid COVID. They haven't been contacted with it. Yes, we've played the game strictly by the rules. Thank you very much. And I hope that we all do. But I do hope, Mr. Mayor, that everyone here recommends to everyone and encourages everyone to have the vaccinations. I'd like to go to have the vaccinations as soon as they're able to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed, you just stuck your hand up again at the very last minute.
Okay.
Do you wish to speak on this motion?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think it's a motion which I will be supporting, and I'm sure the rest of the group will be as well. It's a sensible motion. It's an important motion, and it's important that we all stick together on such issues. I think in terms of the work the local GPs have done is absolutely fantastic, has already been mentioned before. I think in terms of starting up appointments and going back to normal working practices, I think that is in the process of happening anyway, and hospitals and GPs are being encouraged to do that. In terms of the vaccinations and the rationing, of course, we'd like to see more and more vaccinations across the country, so everybody can get vaccinated at the earliest opportunity. It has to be said, we are doing far better than most of the other countries across the world. We're in a far better position than most of them. That doesn't mean just because people in the UK have been vaccinated, the danger has gone, because this is an international issue, and it's important that as well as people in the UK being vaccinated, that people across the globe are vaccinated too. So, but happy to support the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ahmed. Are there no dissenters to this? In which case I will take it there's a unanimous vote to accept the motion as written and amended by the 2 yellow highlighted sentences. Thank you kindly. Motion accepted as a unanimous vote. moving on to item 13E, to be moved by Councillor Clegg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is only a very short motion. I will read it out. That the housing number requirement in the local plan be set at 146. Mr. Mayor, it is quite clear from public comments that there is a widespread concern and distress over the number of greenfields earmarked for housing in the Pendle local plan and the inadequate number of brownfield sites being used. Once these sites have been built on, they are gone forever. They are never, ever going to come back. Along with other members of this council, I have been involved with several local plan consultations in the past. I have never known a reaction as strong as this one from across the borough. I think it is time that this council got behind the residents and supported them fully. I accept that the government are demanding more and more house building and making it easier for developers to do so, which is nothing new, they always have. The housing number is set far too high and allocated land and the number of sites must match the houses we agree to build. If it doesn't, the plan just falls down. If we leave the number as it is, for every piece of land we take out of the plan, we must put another piece back into it to replace it, or the numbers do not stack up. On average, over the last few years, we have not exceeded the government's minimum number of 146. The answer, in my opinion, is to reduce the housing number to 146. So that would then allow us to remove some of the greenfields from the plan without having to replace them with even more green space from elsewhere in the borough. This evening, we have agreed to save Gibb Hill land by having discussions with other bodies and making that into a managed green space, which I might add, along with other councillors, I supported. This has now put us in a position where our allocated land does not match our housing numbers. So we either need to find more land now to put in the plan to replace the Gibb Hill land, or we need to reduce the numbers. I know which one I prefer, Mr. Mayor. I also accept that officers' comments in a letter earlier this week about us changing the numbers during the consultation. It is going to be several months before the new plan is adopted at best. I would rather get the numbers right now, even if it delays the plan a few weeks. Having a broken plan is no good to any of us, and you could say it's worse than having no plan at all, Mr. Mayor. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Clegg. Councillor Newman.
Is that all right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to second this motion. It's a very reasonable number of 146 or around that will sustain Pendle far better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Turner, you were the first to raise your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I support the reduction in housing numbers wholeheartedly, as I have said previously, because we need to save our greenfield sites. Yes, we had a very informative comment from the Chief Executive earlier on in the week, and I must be honest, I have sympathies with his comments. How much better it may be, and I realise if I propose an amendment, I've got no seconder, so it won't be accepted, but perhaps the proposer and the seconder of this motion may consider that we actually withdraw the motion that we have here this evening on the understanding that we will come back after the consultation is concluded to reduce the number to a more realistic number, which may even be considerably less than 146, but it will be in next government, it will be in the next council, not in this one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm kind of lost for words there for a minute, Councillor Turner. I've got to think seriously about that. Councillor Tom Whip, you have got your hand in the air. Would you like to carry on the discussion?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the point about greenfields is a very valid one. Opinions are very strong about our countryside, and we should protect that. But I think crucial to this debate is also the employability of the area. We're going to see massive layoffs when we come out of COVID-19, even though we all wish that isn't the case. We saw the shock that came of the news of the closing of Rolls-Royce. Thankfully, a campaign has eased that, but I'm sure the after effects are still to be felt. Mr. Mayor, this lower housing number would represent a more proper, adequate response to what the future of Pendle will look like in terms of housing need. And it will be a better basis for the figures going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. I have no more hands in the air. So, again, can I take it, since I've not heard anything truly against it other than Councillor Turner's suggestion that we defer, can I take it that the motion as published is a unanimous decision? Accept the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you kindly, councillors. So that motion is accepted. Can I therefore move on to item 13F, which is a motion on community safety, to be moved by Councillor Alice Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know it's getting late, but I think that this is quite an important motion. As I'm sure everyone here knows, that the murder of Sarah Ebenard, as she walked home from a friend's house, has brought about a national debate regarding the safety of our streets, particularly for women. I found out that in 2009, LCC began a 20-year programme to install LED lamps to their existing street lights, and they were to be fitted with dimmer switches. From the number of complaints I've received and my own experience, it looks like the work is now being carried out in Cone and Pendle as a whole. I was told that these new white lights work better than those producing yellow light, as they can see colour and so make the CCTV images clearer. I'm afraid it's of little comfort to me to know that any problem I might face when walking down a street that's fitted with this type of light will at least be able to be picked up by a camera that is obviously nowhere near the street I am in, and of course not being monitored in real time. For me, and I suspect many women, it's just second nature to consider how risks can be reduced when walking alone in the dark. I don't drive, so every house I've lived in, I've ensured that I'm close to a main road and close to reliable public transport. A few years back, you might remember that the Preston to Cone railway always seemed to suddenly end at Nelson. And this meant a walk from a dark railway station to a horrendously dark old bus station. Oh, what a difference it is today. Should I get in Nelson, we have that bright interlinked bus and train service, which is staffed
late into the night, and it means I don't have to be anxious about using public transport to get home. I always choose well-lit routes when walking back from friends, but this is the problem. One of my previous well-lit routes has now a new lamp installed, which will be a real concern to me when days are shorter. Of course, there's no secret that LCC, like most councils, have to make savings, but their decision to choose to dim the street lights to do this, I really feel it's unacceptable, for it certainly means that people do feel vulnerable in their own communities, and there's a greater risk of crime too. The AA organisation makes it clear that darker streets have caused more car and pedestrian accidents. I still get complaints about the lack of lighting on the M65 as you approach Colne, which is a section of the motorway which seems to be susceptible to driving rain and mist. I'm not sure why. Read the policing. Given that I'm always walking around my ward in Waterside, it's fantastic when I do meet up with the neighbourhood policing team, as it gives an opportunity to both of us to discuss concerns directly. And it is great to hear that there is an intention by the Lancashire Police and Crime Commissioner to provide more officers. For having a visible police presence on the street, in my view, should be a high priority, as knowledge of an area and grassroots information must be vital to any investigation. And it just makes people feel safer. Therefore, this motion is set out on the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor David Whip, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I second this? Can I just correct Councillor Mann in that the County Council have actually been, they've installed LED lights, which were perfectly acceptable just a few years ago, and they're ripping out the perfectly good lights and replacing them with lights that are inferior and are set to dim. And that's a policy that, with my other hat on as a county councillor, I challenged at County Hall in February for the second time, and unfortunately the controlling group at Lancashire County Council voted that proposal down. It's regrettable that the very nature of the streetlights is being frustrated by having ones that are set to dim permanently, not like set to dim in the middle of the night when there aren't very many people about, but set to dim all the time. And I've actually been to look at some of the streets that have been changed in this way, and they are really masses of darkness with a scattering of light, in little isolated islands, and it really isn't good enough. But I wanted to refer to the policing, because there was a time not too long ago, in the 2000s, when we had a very good neighbourhood policing set up. And I think what our group is demanding is that we return to a position where we have proper policing here in Pendle, and of course in the rest of the county, where there are officers that local residents know and respect, and are able to interact with, them being friendly faces, rather than somebody who rocks up in a police car when there are massive problems. And I would just refer to the issues that there are currently, and particularly, unfortunately, in Colne, where we have some apparently very wayward youths who are wreaking havoc. And I think that if we had an effective neighbourhood policing presence, then those problems would be addressed. They would get a grip on those issues, and we would get back to some sort of sensible social interactions, rather than the very distressing conditions that we've got at the moment. The other aspect of this resolution is about the feelings of safety. I chair the Community Safety Partnership, and this is an issue that Community Safety Partnership will be taking very seriously. But full on to Councillor Mann about the street lights. It is ridiculous to rip out good, bright lights and replace them with dim ones. I think, to pardon the pun, it's a dim move, and it ought not to happen. I second.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. Councillor Ahmed.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be very brief. In terms of the motion itself, I agree with the reasons behind it. It is an important motion that's before us. In terms of some extra funding, Lancashire Police received an extra over £700,000 to tackle serious violent crime, and that will help support deal with such serious issues like we have before us in terms of this motion. But can I just make a couple of suggestions, a friendly amendment or consideration, please? I accept in terms of the extra visibility in terms of policing and the lighting itself. I'd like to make another suggestion in terms of the educational side of it, guidance, advice and support for victims. So not just about in terms of the actual crime itself and trying to prevent it in the first place, but God forbid if something does happen to a victim, first of all, we try and prevent it through education, giving advice, having the police going into colleges and schools and giving young women advice and guidance as to how they can try and protect themselves. And like I said, if, God forbid, something does happen, the support is in place for the victims. So I'd just like to put that forward to the mover, please, if that could be incorporated in terms of the extra support and guidance and the educational part of it as well, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Councillor Whip, are you prepared to accept those as friendly amendments?
That started as a very good amendment, but I think we'll keep the actual motion as it is.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I return therefore to the question from Councillor Ahmed. Do you have a seconder to an amendment to the motion?
I will second it.
Who's I will?
Sarah Coburn-Price.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. In that case, we do have an amendment to make additions in terms of support, guidance and education. Would either Nadeem or Sarah please give me some exact words that we can put as an amendment in the minutes, please?
While Nadeem is thinking about that, because it's his motion, may I speak very briefly about my experience in Cone?
I'd like to bring you in a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, go on then. If you are going to second whatever Nadeem is going to come up with.
Well, just very briefly, and I'm only speaking for Cone, all I can say, and I'm sure that Margaret will absolutely agree with me on this, is that the team has grown in our neighbourhood team. And had it not been for COVID, and I'm sure that's a sentence that said a lot in all kinds of contexts, we would be in a different position now. They were rolling out a team that would go door to door to give residents, individual officers, mobile phone numbers and contact details. And also we were to get a fully formed neighbourhood team in Colne, separate from the standard police, focusing on neighbourhood issues, actually headed by a dedicated sergeant. Already we've seen an amazing increase in their attendance at meetings, the Colne Community Safety Partnership, and often when there aren't problems with IT, the Colne Area Committee. They've been fully involved in restorative justice that Margaret has been running every single week, and they have been really involved in the Colne Youth Action Group and working out a long-term strategy. So given that improvement both in manpower, time and energy by the police, I just really want to stand up for them and ensure that we are seen to recognise their hard work and commitment to our town.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn-Price. Nadeem, are you going to give me some exact words that we can write into the as an amendment?
Yes, can do. Yeah, so basically to add a number 2, the wording would be as follows: to request the Police and Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable to ensure adequate advice, education, guidance and support to women.
Not at this point in time. I will call you back. You will be allowed to speak a little later. We therefore have an amendment on the table and a seconder. Yeah. That amends the... I actually am a little confused here because Nadeem said part 2 of the motion, but he did include the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable rather than Lancashire County Council. So are we talking about amending the first paragraph to include guidance, support and education?
No, numbers 1 stays as it is.
Yes.
I've put another number 2 and then number 3 stays as it is as well.
Okay. So you want a third one?
Yeah, please.
Number 2 becomes number 3.
Okay. You're losing me there, Nadeem. So
It doesn't matter. You can call it number 3. It doesn't really matter which way around, as long as it's in there.
Just adding that sentence.
Yeah, you're going to add the sentence then to number 2.
No, I'm moving a separate resolution. Let's call it number 3 for simplicity's sake. So we've got 1 and 2, and I've given the wording for number 3.
Right. Okay. In that case, we are now speaking to the amendment, and I have Councillor Tom Whip with his hand in the air, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I mean, the issue at hand that I think Councillor Nadeem Ahmed is bringing up here is education for women. But it's not the victims of assaults that are to blame. It's not them who should be educated. If education comes into the picture here, it should be across the board, all sexes, comprehensive sex education that involves talking about consent, talking about power dynamics, and a conversation that includes everyone about how you should act around other people, about how you should respect everyone, and how you shouldn't attack people. I mean, it's It's that simple in my mind. And it shouldn't be, you know, telling young girls, be afraid, be very afraid, you can't go outside. That's not how it should be. It needs to be comprehensive, all sexes, and talking about that respect, consent. Mr. Mayor, if Councillor Ahmed would amend his amendment to be more comprehensive and ask for better sex education across the board for all schools in Lancashire, or indeed the entirety of the United Kingdom, I would be happy to support that. But not as it stands. Victims should not be told to hide in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whip. Councillor Iqbal.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak to the whole debate. I don't want to have two bites of the cherry because of the timing, but the motion moved by Councillor Alice Mann was quite clear in terms of what outcomes we needed. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed started off, as Councillor Mann says, I think in a good way, but for some bizarre reason then went completely off track. And if we're going to educate girls or women or boys or men in schools and colleges to say, look, these are the risks for being a victim and watch out, it's common sense. But for me, the point is that if my daughter or my wife or my mother or my grandmother wants to go out and the street lamp is very poorly, dimly lit, well, there's no education to be given in schools or colleges, Mr. Mayor, to say, look, go another route, because that route might also be dimly lit. The fundamental point here is that the county council have made a mistake, and we as Pendle Council, along with other district councils, need to make some representation to say, look, you've got it wrong. What we shouldn't be doing, Mr. Mayor, is trying to better our county council election careers by not having a direct dig at the county council where they've got it wrong, even if they are of the same party. But the education, I agree there needs to be education, but I think what Nadeem is moving, and maybe you need to read what he's moving, and I'd seriously suggest that he withdraws that, because I think that's giving out the totally wrong message to the women and girls in our community. Because let's say they leave the college at Nelson and they want to walk up to where I live at Manchester Road. Well, if they're coming along a dimly lit street lamp, what education we're going to give them? Well, you shouldn't be out after dark, or go another route, but that might be dimly lit, or try and walk on the M65, which is not lit at all. So, with respect to Nadeem, you know, he started off in the right vein, but I think whether his wording has got wrong, I'd ask him to withdraw that and just support the original motion, because that covers everything. And I think that way we send a clear message to both the County Council and to the PCC that we take this type of thing very seriously, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Victoria Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Straight up, I support the education across the board. I would support more street lighting and more police. So I've no issue with the motion or the amendment at all. I just think that the motion misses some aspects. It's not just women that fear walking alone at night. Men do too. Anyone can be attacked. And I've noticed that recently when I'm out walking the dog alone, men tend to cross the street and avoid being near me. And I hate that we've created a society where men feel that they have to avoid women to make us feel safe. That shouldn't happen. The truth is, I am much more likely to be attacked and murdered by somebody I know living in my household or a family member than I am some random person in the street. But I don't avoid my family. You know, it's just not something you do. So we need to be really careful about creating this society of fear and making everybody out to be bad, because the majority of people will not harm us. And I really think that's a lesson that we need to learn. Of course, be aware of your surroundings and everything, but we can't go around living in fear. And believe me, I've noticed that over the last 3 years, that is exactly what I have been doing since becoming a councillor. I've received messages and things, and knowing that all my personal details, my address is online, has caused me to live in fear for 3 years. And it's one of the reasons I will not restand. I don't want to live the rest of my life in fear. In February, I had over 200 messages from one man asking me some very strange questions and wanting pictures of wherever I live. And I know that my address and everything is online. Do I feel protected as a councillor? No. And yet we're talking about protecting people in the streets. Yeah, I'm all for that. But it's across the board and we have to protect everybody. But at the same time, we have to educate people not to live in fear. And it's difficult because, like I say, I've experienced it for the last 3 years. So I think education really does play a big part. And Nadine, maybe come back and just say education across the board. It's never the victim's fault, never. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria Ann. Pardon?
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor.
Hello, Councillor Whip, please. You wish to make comment?
On the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, the Councillor Tom Whip has made one of the points that I wanted, and he made it much more eloquently than I. I'm a White Rose ambassador, and the primary role of White Rose ambassadors is to reduce the threat of violence to women. I think this debate has strayed into very unfortunate territory. As Tom said, it's the amendment is in effect branding the victims as being responsible for the crime, and to think of, you know, going and educating young women as to how they ought to behave is utterly wrong to my mind. You know, surely the people who should be educated are the perpetrators of that violence. They are the ones who are responsible. And I think the motion was clearly about, firstly about, well, it's almost entirely about our environment, our physical environment, the way in which we have street lighting, or not, as the case may be, adequate or not, as the case may be, and how our environment ought to include friendly, supportive, accessible police officers. And, you know, we've moved on now with this amendment to discuss, you know, going into schools or colleges and telling young women how they should behave. This is utterly wrong. And I'm sorry, but it exposes a mindset which is completely alien to anything that we ought to be doing as Pendle Council, and it's a backward step. So please let us not go down this line, please.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. To Councillor Nadeem Ahmed, please. I think two of the speakers there, Councillor Iqbal and Councillor Whip, have asked you to withdraw that amendment. Are you going to continue to press for a vote on that amendment, please?
I'd like to speak first, if that's okay.
Yes, by all means, Councillor.
Yeah. I'd like to make it absolutely clear for a start, Mr. Mayor, in terms of some of the comments which have been made, to suggest that I am trying to blame the victims is totally wrong, misleading and inaccurate. To suggest otherwise, and they know it full well, that's not the intention of the amendment. The amendment is about education. I accept the proposal put forward by Councillor Tom Whip in terms of the education across the board. I'm perfectly happy to accept that. the intention, I'll reiterate, wasn't to suggest that the victims are to blame. They are not to blame. So it's totally wrong of Councillor Iqbal and Councillor David Whip to suggest otherwise. In terms of the education side, this is about empowerment. It's about empowering women. When I meant the education, it can be things like teaching people self-defence. That is part of the education. I don't see anything that's wrong with that part, but I accept what Councillor Whip said in terms of education across the board. And Councillor Iqbal made the point about the lighting and for us to support our county councillor colleagues. But may I remind Councillor Iqbal, I've not amended the resolution regarding the lighting. I've not touched any of the wording as the motion is set out. No one's here to protect the county council. The most important issue is protecting our community, and that should be our main focus, not about politics. To suggest I'm playing politics on this is totally incorrect. And in terms of, there's one final point which I wanted to make. I mean, in terms of the whole debate, I agree, the whole debate has gone totally off track. That wasn't the intention. It was supposed to be a fair and perhaps the wording in terms of which I hope now I've said education is across the board, that will be accepted in good faith, and let's get on with it and try and do the best for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Mann, will you wrap up the debate on this, please?
Yeah, I thank you for those comments, and the fact that you weren't speaking just about victims there for the education, but I feel that we're muddying the water here with this motion, and we just need to stick to the points about the environment, the fact that we need greater police presence on the street, and we also need adequate lighting. Just on another point, I know it's getting late, but the comments by Councillor Fletcher about her experience as a councillor, I do find very, very worrying. And we as a council need to support every councillor on here, and we need to make sure every single person feels safe in the position that we hold. So that's something perhaps that we might need to discuss at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. We're going to a vote then, which is a vote on the motion as amended by Councillor Ahmed. So it's a vote on the amendment, and again, it'll be a name vote. Can I pass you over to Dean, please?
Mr. Mayor, just before you do so, Councillor Tom Whip is asking if the final wording of the amendment could be read out.
Okay. I accept that request, Councillor Whip. Councillor Ahmed, will you read out the full wording of the motion then, please?
To request the police and crime commissioner and, sorry, let me just start again. Let me get the wording right. To request the police and crime commissioner and chief constable to ensure adequate and appropriate advice, education for all, guidance and support. So it's not focusing on a specific sex, it's a general motion, guidance and support for everybody. But in terms of the education, obviously the motion will be really detailed, but it's talking about self-defense and things like that. So that's the motion. But what I will say is if that isn't going to be accepted by Councillor Mann or Councillor Whip, I will withdraw. I hope it's accepted, but if it's not, I will withdraw my amendment.
No.
Councillor Mann, are you prepared to accept that?
I think it's getting overcomplicated, so I think we'll stick with the original motion, and perhaps at another time we can discuss about the education issues involved in crimes and antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Ahmed, are you withdrawing your amendment then?
Yeah, it's not going to get passed anyway, Mr. Mayor, so it's pointless. I will withdraw.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Ahmed. Do we actually need to go to a full named vote now?
Councillor Tom is entitled to speak on the original motion.
Councillor Tom Whip, you're allowed to speak on the original motion if you wish, but if you don't wish to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would very much like to. Previously at the West Craven Area Committee, I've expressed my views about light pollution, made them very clear. Mr. Mayor, I accept the wording of this motion, obviously. I think it's very clear in what it set out to do, and I think the current policy by LCC should be scrapped. But I would like to see future policies written where they do communicate with the community safety partnerships, area committees, in a consultation process in future if they are still wanting to do these dim lights. I think that would be a very sensible way forward. Obviously, they would provide a good reduction in light pollution, but the way they've gone about it is despicable. And there we are. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Tom Whip. Are there any dissenters then to accepting the motion as written originally and published in the pink agenda sheet? No? In that case, I accept the motion as it's written and it will be recorded as such. That brings us to the end of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did want to get this in. I have a message from Tony's family. They are deeply, deeply grateful for all the heartfelt and genuine tributes that were made about Tony tonight. They have been watching this, and so I did say that I would pass their thanks on. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lord. I did indicate that I would reserve time at the end of this meeting for a few words. I'd like to thank the staff here of Pendle Council for facilitating these meetings in very difficult times during COVID, and I apologise for not being able to control you councillors enough this evening to prevent the lateness of our finish. On the other hand, this is the last meeting of the council as we know it at this point in time with its 49 councillors. When the council returns after the May election, it will be a completely different format with only 33 of you coming back. It might be a different 33, who knows? The public at this point in time makes its own decisions, of course. I'd like to thank each of you councillors who have served over the last year, over the last 2 years effectively, since there was no election last year with COVID. I'd like to thank you all for your support. For me as mayor, this is my last full council meeting as mayor, and therefore I'll be standing down. I'd like to thank those councillors who will not be returning for their service to the council. Your contributions have been varied and interesting, and I wish you whatever success awaits you in the future. It has been an honour to serve as your mayor for the last 2 years, and on that note, I'd rather like to say to you, thank you very much for participating. Thank you for your efforts. I wish you all whatever it is that you wish for yourself in the future. And I'll declare the meeting closed. Wish you a safe journey to your coffee mug, tea mug, whatever it is you're doing. Those of you who do have to travel, safe journey home, and good night, and thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. All the best.